What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. Got a deck profile for you today. One of the formats that I don't talk about that often, and it's one of the only formats where this card is still legal in. That's Modern. So there's a few different Underworld Breach decks in Modern. There's the version that plays Grinding Station as the loop that plays more like a blue-red kind of aggro control deck and get situations where it's not comboing. And then there are also versions that play the card Lotus Field. And even within that category of Lotus Field Breach decks, there are two different types. The first is like a purely blue-red deck using the Arcane engine, so Splice with Psychic Puppetry and the Arcane cards. And there's also a version that plays black, so you can play the Tutors, so specifically like Wishclaw Talisman. So this is a list of that latter category, the Wishclaw Talisman Tutor build, the pure combo list. Brian Cook has been one of the people most frequently uploading videos and new lists for that archetype. So my list is largely inspired by that, but I have a couple of novel tweaks on it which I think improve the deck a little bit. So I'll just briefly explain the combo because depending on the format you're familiar with, Underworld Breach has been used in like Legacy with Brain Freeze, or in Pioneer with Hidden Strings, and they all play out a little bit differently. So how the deck works basically is you get Lotus Field into play somehow, well, just by playing it normally as a land on turn 3, and then you cast Underworld Breach. Then what you want to do is generate enough mana, so you cast Tome Scour, which mills 5 cards, then you exile 3 cards to escape the Tome Scour again, so you mill another 5 cards. Then with a third mana, you escape or cast or escape 1 Twiddle, so a 1 mana card that untaps the Lotus Field, so that gives you the 3 mana back. So in total you milled 10 cards from Tome Scouring twice, you escaped 3 cards, so in total you net 1 extra card into your graveyard, and you spent 3 mana and you got 3 mana back. So it lets you mill out your entire deck, slowly accumulating cards in your graveyard. Each time you do that cycle, you accumulate 1 extra card. Then once you've gone through your whole entire library, you can use those extra cards to like escape Twiddle for some extra mana, then use Wish, which you will have milled over at some point, to find the win condition from your sideboard. So you just Grapeshot them for lethal basically. So yeah, it's a really fun deck to play. It's really a fun thing to like use cards that are banned or too strong in other formats and see like what's the best way to make them work. And yeah, I think like combo decks in Magic are quite interesting. Like other TCGs often don't really support decks like this, so it's just quite a different play experience to kind of like navigate the games and try and figure out how you're going to combo off and win. So I'll get into the deck list quickly. Starting with the lands, we have 4 Lotus Field. It's like one of the key combo pieces in the deck. You have to find 1 every game to win. Definitely play 4. I have 3 Polluted Delta, 4 Misty Rainforest, 3 Scalding Tarn, 2 Steam Vents, 2 Watery Grave, 1 Swamp and 1 Island. So if you're paying attention, you will have already noticed, like if you have Swamp and Island, then shouldn't you have 4 Polluted Deltas? And the answer is yes, that's just like a card availability thing. You can also split the fetches into Flooded Strand, just to play around Pithing Needle or whatever, which is fine as well. The other thing that Bryant has recently done in his past couple of videos is he's playing a slightly different mana base where he cuts one of the steam vents and he cuts the basic swamp, and instead he's playing a second basic island and Otawara, the Kamigawa land that bounces a permanent. So that seems like an interesting or at least reasonable change. I would be willing to consider that as like decent, like it seems like it could be good. The basic swamp is often not that great or not necessary, and you don't usually need the second steam vents either. So the Otawara could come in handy sometimes, I suppose. But yeah, it's pretty close either way. Then the spells now. So for the cantrips and the way to like dig through your deck, we have the 4 Mishra's Bauble, 4 Consider, and 4 Otherworldly Gaze. So the deck really values having cards in its graveyard. So Consider and Otherworldly Gaze are cards where they look like there could be other options that are, you know, arguably stronger. So whether you think that might be like Serum Visions or something like that. But the even though Otherworldly Gaze is card disadvantage, it gives you such powerful selection, and the fact that it lets you look at 3 cards and take the best one, and it has a flashback as well, so you can potentially look at even more, and it's putting so many cards in your graveyard at the same time for that escape fodder. And then Consider, same deal, putting cards in your graveyard is quite strong, and the instant speed is decent as well, because when you have the like baubles to peek at your library, often you will like bauble yourself and then look at your top card and decide, oh, I want to draw that, I don't want to fetch, so I'll pass the turn with my fetch land, draw the card I saw off the bauble, then Consider. And you know, plays like that you don't have the flexibility when you have a sorcery speed cantrip. So yeah. And the bauble might seem like kind of weird for a combo deck, because it doesn't give you any like actual selection, it just replaces itself. But again, it's like a 0 mana thing that cycles. It gives you some selection with the cantrips and things. And you can, in some games, you can replay them with Breach as like a way to draw extra cards if you're stuck. So overall, yeah, the bauble is really strong. Then we have the 8 untap effects. So we have 4 Dream's Grip and 4 Twiddle. So basically the same card most of the time, just 1 mana, untap your Lotus Field. The other thing you can do with them is tap down a creature that's about to kill you, like a thing with a hammer on it or something like that. And sometimes you like tap down your opponent's land so they can't combo. I mean, they can't counter your combo. Or with the Dream Script entwined, sometimes you do both. So yeah, you only need access to 1 Twiddle to do the loop, because you can keep escaping the same one over and over. So it might look a bit odd to play so many copies, but each one is +2 mana even when you're like setting up the combo. Whether you're like using the Wish to find the Tome Scour, it basically works as kind of like a multicolor Dark Ritual. So yeah, it's good to play all 8 of these in the list. Then as some disruption, we have 4 Inquisition of Kozilek. You could play Thoughtseize, obviously, but the life loss is definitely meaningful. And there's not a whole lot of stuff in Modern that you care about that costs more than 3. Like Force of Vigor would be the big one, but all of the other counter spells Answer the Storm, or I guess possibly Force of Negation, but that's not a very popular card in Modern. They all cost 3 or less. All the other enchantment removal cost 3 or less. Endurance costs 3. So overall, just Inquisition is the best option. Then as the combo package, we have the. I'm also playing one Pact of Negation main deck, which has relatively high amount of utility just as a thing that you can search for. I'll talk about that when we get to the tutors. Then the combo package, we have the 1 Tome Scour in the main deck and the 3 Underworld Breach, just the cards that you need to do the combo. In the tutors, so we have 4 Wishclaw Talisman and 4 Wish. So Wishclaw Talisman is pretty strong. In a way, it's like a Grim tutor, because in total you're spending 3 mana to do the tutor, but it lets you divide the mana up across both turns. So you can play Wishclaw on turn 2, then on turn 3 when you're going to win, it only costs you 1 mana to use it. Pretty strong. If you have a ton of mana, you can activate this, hold priority, use Twiddle on it to untap it, and then activate it again. So that doesn't come up much because it costs so much mana, but it's an important thing to be aware of. So yeah, it can find Breach, it can find Lotus Field, it can find the Tome Scour to do the combo, it just does it all. Wish is kind of similar. You can't wish for a Lotus Field. Well, you can. I mean, like, it's a thing you're allowed to do, but we have to play all 4 in the main deck. Because it takes your land drop to wish for a Lotus Field, so you couldn't wish for a Lotus Field until turn 4 anyway, which is like, and then it would completely tap you out of mana as well. So you would be winning like turn 5 at the earliest, which is generally just too slow. You'd rather have the extra sideboard slot and draw your main deck Lotus Field more consistently rather than play one of your Lotus Field in the board. But the Wish can get the Underworld Breach because you play the 4th Underworld Breach in the sideboard as a Wish target. It also finds the Tome Scour for when you're doing the combo, and it can find like Pact of Negation to protect your combo, or Pithing Needle, or Bounce Spell, things like that. It does basically it all. And the other really good thing about Wish that's kind of unique to how this deck works is that if you, unlike the wishes from, I think Judgment is the set that has the old wishes in it, this wish doesn't exile itself when it resolves. So if you have enough mana, you can you wish for that Underworld Breach from your sideboard, then you escape the wish that you just cast using that Underworld Breach, then you wish for the Tome Scour from your sideboard, and then you combo. So that costs quite a lot of mana to start, so it doesn't happen all that often, but it happens a little bit more often in the build of the deck that I'm playing, because of the last card that I'll show you. So that was 57 cards main deck so far. And the last card in the list is 3 copies of Amulet of Vigor. So Amulet is obviously a staple card in Modern at this point, but in a completely different deck. So it seems a little bit strange to use Amulet of Vigor in this way. In case you haven't figured it out, it's because Lotus Field comes into play tapped. So on the turn that you play Lotus Field, if you have Amulet of Vigor in play, it just untaps your Lotus Field. So it's like a one-shot Twiddle effect. So I think a lot of people's initial reaction to this idea is that it will seem very underwhelming, but I think people are a little bit biased because they understand Amulet of Vigor in the context of the Primeval Titan deck. And in that deck, the potential of Amulet of Vigor to do silly things, like the ceiling is just so much greater. Like it can add upwards of like 10 mana per game. You know, it's giving your Primeval Titan haste. It's you know, it just does all these crazy things that are like so much more powerful. When in this deck, literally the only thing and the best thing it can do is like add 3 mana. But when you think about it, what that means is that this card is kind of like a dark ritual that adds any color and has like this kind of foretell / suspend option. That means that like you can pay the mana on an earlier turn, and then later when you play the Lotus Field, this just straight up adds 3 mana that turn, whereas Dark Ritual only adds 2 mana in the turn that you play it, because you have to pay the black mana for Ritual on the turn that you play it, obviously. So when you think about it that way, that effect is actually like quite broken. Like a Dark Ritual that did that, if you could play that in like a Storm deck in Legacy or something, it would just be like absurdly powerful. So I think the Amulet in this list is actually quite decent, because having that extra mana to start the combo matters a lot when you're using your Wish to find the Tome Scour, or you're using 1 mana that turn to activate the Claw, things like that. Having basically what's an extra copy of Twiddle is pretty much always going to be useful. So I think it is a really good card to play in the main deck. Now it doesn't revolutionize the deck per se. Like in a way, it is just additional copies of Twiddle, which is a card you're already playing 8 copies of already, basically. So it doesn't necessarily change like the matchup dynamics versus anything, or you know, the like lines of play. But I think it's just like a slight upgrade to the deck. So what Brian was playing in the main deck instead of these Amulet was he was playing 1 fewer Wish, so he was only playing 3. So he basically replaced these 4 cards with Street Wraith. Now that has some upside behind it. So the reason why you don't play Street Wraith in any random deck usually, so in Magic we would say that having a smaller library size is better. Like when we build our lists, we try and get them down to 60. So we draw our best cards more consistently, and we're more likely to draw a good mix of like lands and spells. So playing Street Wraith in a way is like playing a 56 card list, because anytime you draw it, it just replaces itself immediately. So in terms of those aspects I just mentioned, the drawing a good mix of lands and spells and drawing your best cards more often, playing Street Wraith from that point of view would be a good thing. But we never see lists do that unless they have a specific reason to play Street Wraith. So the reason for that is because firstly the life loss matters. It's not a thing you can just ignore. And the second thing is that in Magic, when you look at your opening hand, you're allowed to mulligan it. So you're allowed to look at your hand, say, this hand doesn't have the right mix of effects that I want. It has too many lands, or not the right spells, so I'm going to mulligan. And when you look at an opening hand that has Street Wraith in it, you don't know what the Street Wraith is going to turn into. So after you draw your card with Street Wraith and you look at your new card, you might look at your hand and think, well, this isn't a good hand, I would have mulliganed this. But Street Wraith doesn't give you that option. So in some decks, Street Wraith is good. So for example, in decks like Death Shadow, you care about having the extra card in the graveyard from the Street Wraith, you care about losing life. In decks like Living End, it's a free creature that comes back from your Living End, so that matters. So how does it stack up for this deck? So the life loss is always going to be a thing. Some games that's going to matter, sometimes it's not. It's definitely not a problem that you can just ignore, but it's not the end of the world, let's just say that. Now, drawing a random card off the Street Grave, well, on one hand, this deck has a lot of ways to make the draw not random. So, for example, you can use Mishra's Bauble on yourself, see that it's a card you want to draw, then you can cycle the Street Grave, then play a fetch land, then play a Consider. So in that sense, you're not getting a random card from the Street Grave. Or you can play Otherworldly Gaze first. So you look at the top of the library, so you know what you're going to draw next. Then Street Wraith isn't giving you a random card, it's giving you a card that you have basically selected because you have these spells in your deck that give you the control over the top of your library. So in that way, Street Wraith is a solid card for the list. Like that's an upside that other decks don't have when they would consider playing Street Wraith. And also this deck does care about having cards in the graveyard because you need them to pay for your escape costs. So that's another plus for Street Wraith in this list. But the problem with Street Wraith is that this Underworld Breach deck, the problem of drawing a random card in a situation where you are drawing a random card because you don't have the Otherworldly Gaze or the Bauble or whatever to set up the Street Wraith, taking random draws is quite bad because you need like the perfect mix of effects for the combo to work. So just looking at the lands, right? Like you do need one Lotus Field to play the game, but two is completely useless. So if you have one and you draw a second one, that's bad. You need two other lands so you can sacrifice them to play the Lotus Field. But once you have the Lotus Field in play, you're already pretty much good to go. Like in most games, having one more land after that is usually not very helpful. So that's another random draw that can hurt you. If you do need some Twiddle to start the combo and have enough mana to start winning. Once you already have like one or two, you don't really need any more. You'd rather find like the Underworld Breach or the combo piece that's actually going to let you start the combo. So you don't want to draw like too many random Twiddles, that doesn't help. Assuming your opponent can't interact or counter it, the second Underworld Breach doesn't do anything. You're going to win the game when you find the first one. Like you need the exact mix of all of the right combination of effects. So when I describe the way the deck works like that, it sort of makes the deck sound like unplayable. Like, why? But is it really that inconsistent? If you need you're telling me it's not just that A plus B combo deck, it's like a plus B plus C plus D plus E. And in a way, yes, that's kind of true, but you have enough of the cantrips and things to have the selection. You have some of the most powerful tutor effects that exist in the format. You have the Wish and the Claw. With the Consider and the Gaze, you have enough ways to cantrip through your deck with enough selection that you can generally find what you want. I mean, of course, there are games where you draw the wrong mix of things and then you brick, but otherwise the deck would just be unstoppable, The point that I'm trying to get at is that drawing the random card, with the Street Wraith activation, is a thing that you want to avoid as much as possible. And I'm not convinced that the deck is good enough at avoiding that downside with the Baubles and with the Otherworldly Gaze for Street Wraith to be worth it. I think it's better just to have the amulets plus the fourth wish. So rather than playing the quote unquote 56 card deck, you just instead have more mana and action, so you better informed on your mulligan decisions, and you can potentially go off more easily with this kind of like powerful dark ritual effect that you can access. So that's the main deck, and I'll check the description if you want a full overview of the list. If you sort of like lost track of all the cards halfway through, I'll put the list in the description. Then for the sideboard, you've already seen we have the one Underworld Breach in the sideboard as well, just as a wish target. Pretty important to have that. You have one Tome Scour, one in the main, one in the sideboard, because you want to be able to tutor for it with either Claw or Wish. That happens often enough. One Grapeshot as the win condition. In every single one of Brian's videos, he does this like little disclaimer where he feels like he has to defend the Grapeshot as opposed to playing like Thus's Oracle or something instead. I don't know, I think it doesn't really matter that much either way. I think probably not having to like mill yourself exactly your entire library every time to win is one of the biggest concerns. Like there aren't really decks that gain enough life that winning with Grapeshot becomes a problem. But I don't think it strongly matters either way. Then other cards in the sideboard, we have one Aeve, just as like a backdoor win the game. I mean, if you've played familiar with Storm in any other format, then you kind of know what this is for. Just in a situation where you don't have enough resources to quite fully combo, you can often like cobble a win together just by playing a few rituals and then finding this. If you have Storm of like 5 or 6, then, or even 4, like when this comes in as like 6, 6, 7, 7, you have enough board that it's usually pretty hard for your opponents to deal with. We have some removal spells for different weird permanents that can give you trouble. So I have one Echoing Truth, one Void Snare. So what usually happens is you'll like board in the Echoing Truth and you leave Void Snare in the board as a wish target. They just, because Echoing Truth is like slightly more flexible in the fact that you can use it end of turn and it bounces multiple things. But Void Snare is a bit better as a wish target because it only costs you 1 mana. That's usually how I use those to effect. Then we have 2 Pithing Needle. So again, I like to play like one main, usually board in 1 and leave 1 as a wish target. So the big thing to hit with Pithing Needle is the Boseiju, because you can't discard it with Inquisition of Kozilek, and you can't counter it with Pact of Negation either. But it stops your combo because Underworld Breach is an enchantment. So they can just blow up your Underworld Breach in the middle of your combo and then you're kind of stuck. So you name the Boseiju with the needle and then they can't activate it. But it also can be decent versus cards like Tome Scour, you know, those style of like artifacts that need to activate to stop your graveyard. You can use Pithing Needle against those as well. Then I play 2 Pact of Negation. Good to board in versus those decks where you expect them to interact with you by playing spells on the turn you're trying to combo. So whether that's countering your combo with a counter spell, you Pact of Negation counter back. They can hit your graveyard with like an Endurance in the middle of your combo, or they can blow up your Underworld Breach in the middle of your combo with like a Force of Vigor or something. Pact of Negation is just the best way of dealing with all of those. So 2 of those in the sideboard as well. I'm also playing 4 Leyline of Sanctity. So in Brian's most recent video, in his second most recent video, he played 4 Leyline. And in his most recent video, he's playing 4 Malevolent Hermit. So in my own experience playing this deck in paper a bit, I've been really happy with the Leyline. I think having an extra thing, not only does it stop the decks trying to hit you with discard spells, but it's also a very good tool versus Burn, which is a very troublesome matchup. and also in my experience having it versus those black mid-range decks that have a lot of discard, it's just been amazing in those matchups as well. So yeah, I've been pretty happy with the Leyline, but depending on the meta game, you could argue possibly for playing the Malevolent Hermit. In my opinion, I think from my experience playing the deck, I think perhaps the decks that Malevolent Hermit is good against, you are already fairly well equipped to deal with them with Pact of Negation, perhaps. Such that I would rather play Leyline of Sanctity in that slot in the sideboard. I think that is probably how I feel about it now, but I don't know how confident I am about that. Might have to test the deck a little bit more in those matchups to see. But yeah, at the moment I'm pretty happy with the Leyline. And the 15th card in the sideboard, which is my own brand new crazy innovation, never before seen, one copy of Brooding Saurian. So a lot of people watching this video have probably never even seen this card before. It's a creature from Cold Snap. So 2 green and green for a 4/4 lizard. At the beginning of each end step, each player gains control of every non-token permanent that they own. So, I mean, some of you might be still bamboozled, like, it's a sideboard card against decks trying to steal your permanents. Like, what deck does that? But no, that's not what it's for. Remember when you activate Wishclaw Talisman, you give the Wishclaw Talisman control to your opponent. So what that means is that usually when you're using the Wishclaw Talisman, you're using it as like a one-shot tutor effect. Like, you're activating it and then giving it to your opponent and then winning that turn so they can never use it. You don't usually use Wishclaw Talisman as like a thing to help you set up. Like, you're going to activate it and then search for one of your combo pieces and then attempt to win the next turn when you have enough mana. Like, usually giving your opponent the option to tutor is going to let them find something that's like very devastating. So what the Saurian lets you do is, in post-board games where usually your opponent's boarded most of their removal out, and the game has become a bit more challenging because you expect your opponent to have a lot more interaction with you, whether that's in the form of like extra discard or more counterspells, things like that. You want to have some way to like rebuild gaining extra card advantage, because you know you need either you had all of the cards you needed to do the combo, but now you need extra cards to answer the like Relic of Progenitors or something, or your opponent played like 3 Four Seasons on you and now you just have no cards and now you need a way to rebuild all your combo pieces. So this combo is a very effective way of doing that. So you've built up like a few lands, you have your Lotus Field and maybe some mana. You activate the Talisman, finding the Saurian, then you cast the Saurian and end the turn and it takes the Talisman back. So next turn, presumably they can't kill the Saurian because most decks won't be very readily equipped to kill a 4/4 in the post-board games. So you untap with your claw, you activate it again. You either start assembling your combo, or you find an answer to the thing that you need to stop, or you can find more Pact of Negations to stop threats for your opponent, and then just start killing them with a 4/4. And then when your Wishclaw is about to run out of counters, you can use the last counter to search for another one, and then keep it going if the game is like really that grindy. It sounds like a bit like greedy or silly, but in my limited experience using this card, it actually plays out like pretty decently, I think. Like it's not too difficult to get it to the point where it does function like that. You know, it's just pulling your claw back every single turn and leaving you sculpt your hand like as much as you want. So in some matchups, that's not what the game is about. Like you're just trying to kill them as fast as possible, because the game is all about a race, or the way your opponent's deck is built, you expect them to like have plenty of answers for this card even after sideboarding or something like that. So it's not like a universally strong thing, but it's a very powerful juke that lets you like attack from an angle that your opponent is often not going to be ready for. So I think I'm pretty happy to at least keep trying it for now. So the most recent tournament I played was just like a small local tournament. I was playing versus Hammer, and I started doing the combo. Like I played Breach, and then I flashed back one Twiddle, and then in response to that, my opponent played March of Otherworldly Light on my Underworld Breach. So I hadn't actually boarded in the Saurian because I didn't expect Hammer to be that kind of like grindy matchup. But after the Breach removed and the Twiddle resolve untap, I had enough mana to wish for this. And I'd already given my opponent Claw that turn. So I played the Saurian, I took the Claw back, and from there, after they didn't have enough resources to Hammer combo me, so I used the Wishclaw first to find another Twiddle. So not only does that set up my combo for later, but if they ever find the Hammer for the one-turn shot, then you can Twiddle their attacker to stop it and give you one more turn. Then after that, find the next Claw again, or I think maybe I just naturally drew one. So it gave me like over 2 or 3 turns, I could find every card that I needed to make sure my opponent couldn't win. And I had to win myself. It was just like trivial to win the game from that point. So yeah, this is a very interesting combo that so far I'm happy with it, and I'm interested to see whether it continues to perform or whether it has some flaws that just haven't been exposed yet, but I'm pretty excited about it so far. So yeah, that's the Grixis Underworld Breach deck in Modern. Haven't played any combo deck in any format for a while, actually. I think... No, that's not true. I played the Underworld Breach when it was legal at Pioneer. And before that, the last time I played a combo deck in a competitive format was probably like Eggs in Modern. That's how long ago that was. But yeah. It's very fun to play combo when you find a list that clicks for your playstyle. So that's all for today. So it's been Li-Fi TCG signing out.